Okay, so really briefly, we recorded a lot about Star Wars, and we originally intended to do 2 episodes. One was supposed to be all about the original trilogy. The other was supposed to be about the prequel trilogy. But we got to talking, and it went off the rails. So I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to edit this, but what you're listening to is part 1 of a 2-part episode that is on the feed. So thank you for listening, and hope you enjoy it. This is Matt Hurt at Obsessive Viewer on Twitter.
This is Tiny at Obsessive Tiny on Twitter.
And I am Mike White. You can find me at I am Mike White on Twitter.
And this is ObsessiveViewer.com's The Obsessive Viewer Podcast. Hello, and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly movie and TV podcast that covers a specific topic, be it genre, trope, movie, or show, each episode. You can find back episodes at ovpodcast.com, find the blog at obsessiveviewer.com, and subscribe to the subreddit at r/obsessiveviewer. And longtime listeners will recognize the voice at the beginning of this episode, and also any... Mike! Hey!
Yeah. Hi.
How's it going?
We're home.
Nice.
Right?
Of
with
the movie.
With the new movie?
Yeah, and then Tiny. Oh, good. Yeah. So good.
And then, yeah.
But yeah, we're here to talk about Star Wars, right? Guys? Yeah, Star Wars?
Yes.
Super.
Absolutely.
We should probably preface this, of course, with, if you are a longtime listener, you know that we've done this before, right? We've had this conversation. Yes. Or at least Matt and I have had a brief conversation in which we discussed the merits of Star Wars. And
yes.
So just to set it up, so you guys know where we're coming from, Matt is anti-Star Wars.
Well, we'll get into that in a bit, but...
Okay.
Okay, but for listeners, we are reviewing Star Wars in the lead up to The Force Awakens, which comes out as of this recording next Friday. And so previously on this podcast, we've talked about Star Wars before in different aspects, and particularly in OV144, we had a B-roll episode where in it, at the 41-minute mark, me and Mike discussed Star Wars and my kind of... not anti-ness of it, but my kind of lack of affinity for it.
Your aversion to it?
My aversion to it. Yeah.
You're kind of, I would say you're unimpressed.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I'll get into that in a bit. Yeah. And then also we do about once a year we do a Vault movie episode where we basically take movies that are close to us and we put them into a proverbial vault. And we just basically use that as an excuse to talk about them in a specific episode. And we entered Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope into the vault at OV117, which was into the Vault 3. So yeah,
was that me or Tiny?
That was you.
That was
you.
That was Mike. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, what we're going to be doing, and we're planning on recording 2 episodes back to back tonight. Which you guys
So
won't
if we
know.
sound a little weary by the end.
Yeah, it's because we're talking about movies that are absolutely freaking horrible. But right now we're talking about the original trilogy. and we're so I don't know exactly how we want to start here, but I have kind of in the notes our history with Star Wars. Like, so I figure that...
I think that's essential to any Star Wars conversation.
Yeah.
And for me, what I love so much about kind of talking with other people about Star Wars is kind of figuring out how they got into Star Wars, what Star Wars means to them, and that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I have many thoughts about my position towards Star Wars, but I'll go ahead and yield the floor to you guys to discuss it. Tiny and Mike, why don't you tell me how you feel about Star Wars, how you got into Star Wars, and what it means to you as a human being on this planet.
Sure. Tiny, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think I've told this anecdote on the podcast before, but it was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I first came to Star Wars when I was a young boy. I vividly remember being in a toy store. I don't remember which one and I can't tell you too many details, but I remember being in a toy store with my mom, and I walk by a action figure of Jabba the Hutt, and I just kind of stopped and looked at it, and I just kind of grabbed my mom, and I was like, "What, Mom? What is that? What is that thing?" And she was like, "Oh, it's like an alien, like a creature from this movie. There's actually 3 movies." I was like, What are those movies? She was like, "They're called Star Wars." I was like, "Can we go watch those like right now? Because I need to see what the hell this thing is. It's weird."
That's what she said to your mom.
I didn't actually, not those words exactly, but I was like, "I want to see this. This is weird and freaky."
I want to believe that you, as a little kid, said to your mom, "I need to go see these damn movies. I need to see what the hell this is all about, Mom."
I wish I was not that ballsy. But I was probably 6 or 7, and I had no idea what Star Wars was. Didn't know anything about it, nothing at all. And then I saw that action figure, and that planted the seed that I wanted to see Star Wars. And of course, I watched the first 2 movies, and I was like, "Oh, where is this slug alien-looking thing at? I haven't even seen it yet," because he doesn't show up till the.
Oh, so this must have been pre-1997.
Yes, it was absolutely. Yeah. I am a purist in that sense. So yeah, I think I got the first Star Wars movie on VHS for Christmas that year, and watched it, and I was like, "Okay, can I see the other 2?" So that's kind of how I came to Star Wars. My dad is a big sci-fi fan, and he likes sci-fi movies and books, and he likes Star Wars, but he's not one of the huge, massive fans like some of the Star Wars fans are. So I didn't come to it through my dad, which is kind of surprising. So yeah, that's how I found Star Wars, and from there I just, it's just like I couldn't not love it. I loved the lightsaber fights and all the weird, goofy looking aliens. That all meant a lot to me as a young boy, and then as you get older, you get attached to these characters, and you explore the story, and the universe really started expanding in the 90s, and you had all this expanded universe and all this Old Republic stuff, and there's just so much to dive into. And I haven't gone too far into the expanded universe, but you just come back to this trilogy at different points in your life, and you just feel differently about it each time. But for me, each time I've grown to love it even more.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, Mike, when were you indoctrinated into Star Wars?
Is it going to be this the whole time, Matt?
No, probably not. Probably not.
Probably.
But that was more in jest than anything. What is your history with Star Wars, and what does it mean to you as a human being on this planet?
Well, Tiny, it's cool that your parents were into some cool stuff, because my parents showed me some cool stuff, and I kind of talk with my mom about a lot of cool stuff now, but Star Wars was definitely not something that they were into. In fact, sci-fi and, I'd say even movies was not a big deal to either of my parents. So, it wasn't until like the mid 90s, before 97, when the re-releases came out, I had this friend, and I'm going to give him a shout out. I don't think he listens to the podcast, but, his name's Fred Eichhorst, and he, and another guy, Josh Haran, were kind of my first friends when I moved to the suburbs of Chicago, in Aurora, and they were both kind of, they were the biggest Star Wars fans I ever knew, and probably still to this day I've ever known. And they were also the first. And so, just getting to know those guys, they were kind of the first real geeks I ever knew about something, really super passionate about this thing. And I was like, okay, well, what is it? I have to know. And so I would go to their houses, and I think one time Star Wars was on, and I kind of sort of watched it mostly, but I was at home one day, and I asked my mom, kind of similar to you, Tiny. I said, "Mom, I need to see Star Wars. Can we rent it?" And we just went out and we got it, and I watched the first one, and the next weekend we watched the next 2. And from then I was hooked. From then on, I was hooked. And then 1997 came around a couple years later, I found out about the re-releases, and like Taco Bell had this promotion, and the Nintendo 64 game Shadows of the Empire came out. They released a new toy line, I think at the end of 1996. And so I just kind of got swept up in all of the stuff that sweeps up a 10, 11, 12-year-old. And so I fully bought in. I went and saw the Star Wars when it came out in '97 when it was re-released. We saw Empire, we saw Jedi. I was super excited about all of it. Super excited, super geared up for The Phantom Menace. It was one of the last movies I saw before we moved to Indiana, so it's kind of special in that way. I will admit to not being as excited for Attack of the Clones. Because it came out the same summer as Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's always kind of been a first love for me. But when episode 3 rolled around, my fandom kicked back in full swing, hardcore. Mm-hmm. I was 17, 18 years old at the time, so I had money to spend on lightsabers. I now have a collection of lightsabers that's in the double digits. I started collecting as many action figures as I could find. That's when I got into the comics. I got into the novels, all the video games. And so it just came, I went from being, I'd say, a geek about it to being some kind of super fan, of Star Wars. And I've been pretty obsessed with it ever since. I've gone back. I've collected, as many copies of the VHS as I can find. I've got all the DVDs, all the Blu-rays. I just love it. And not to kind of steal a lot of what you've said, Tiny, but what I love so much is going back later on and seeing it again and appreciating it in a new way. And finally, I think the time that meant the most you guys were actually a part of was when we watched the original trilogy in a theater for my bachelor party, which I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but that was just unforgettable. Really cool time.
Nice.
That was an amazing time. That was that was fantastic. Hang on,
Maddie.
All right, so my history with Star Wars is a little. I don't know if anyone will find it interesting, but basically, when I was a kid, we moved around. I was born in Indianapolis, then we moved to Florida, then we moved to Ohio, then we moved back to Indianapolis. But I remember specifically when we lived, actually it might have been when we lived here in Indianapolis at first. I don't remember. But anyway, at some point in my life, in my early childhood, one of my first memories of Star Wars in my life is my mom would buy a bunch of action figures, as, to keep them in for when, if they were going to be valuable, because no one, like, my parents weren't into Star Wars. My parents weren't into movies like I would one day be.
But they were into action figures?
Oh no, they were into action figures for the sole purpose of maybe selling them at some point in the future when they were worth money.
Still, that makes your parents way cooler than mine. Man.
Yeah, well, I don't know where any of these action figures went or anything. Like, I have a memory.
That's a tragedy.
Yeah. Like, I have, like, one of my first introductions to Star Wars before I ever saw the movies or anything like that was this little cassette that basically it was a book that you would read along with a radio drama on a cassette tape. And it was basically the first movie solely from the perspective of R2-D2 and C-3PO.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I don't know if Anthony Daniels is who does voice of C-3PO?
Anthony
Daniels. I don't know if it was him doing the voice, but I know that it was basically, it was C-3PO and R2-D2. Nice. It was basically them telling the story of A New Hope with this companion, flimsy little paperback book that you would go through, and I just looked at the pictures because I couldn't read it at that point in my life. But rest assured, I did learn how to read. So I remember that, and then I remember the when the special editions came out, and when was that? The 90s, 97. And I remember that, and I don't remember that in terms of seeing them. I remember that in terms of the marketing and like Mike, you mentioned was it a Taco Bell whatever.
Just
I remember
promotion, yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing commercials for it and thinking, oh yeah, that looks kind of cool and everything. But still didn't really see it. I think maybe a year or two before that, or maybe around that time, my neighbor, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, specifically in, I think it was either OV144 or OV117. But my neighbor would babysit us and he was a huge Star Wars fan. Like, he had a room dedicated to Star Wars everything. And he was just a massive Star Wars fan. And so he had, at that time, he had a Laserdisc, and we watched, was it the Laserdisc that had the episode 4? That was the first,
Yeah.
yeah. So we watched that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I don't even have the Laserdisc.
Yeah, and I don't know if I don't know if we actually finished it, because I think as soon as it started, I was like, why is it the 4th one? And why do I don't know what the rest of them are. And that was like the only time in my life where I thought, I want to see the first 3. So anyway, so I don't, like, I remember that, and I remember just not being able to get into it. And that's
How old were you?
I was probably, I don't know, probably 7 maybe, or maybe a little
Really?
younger.
I mean, I did not care about the fact that it was part. I don't even think I noticed that it was part 4.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I was a little older, maybe 8 or 9, but yeah, I don't know. And that's a shame, because and this is dipping into the actual movie, but we'll get to that in a second. But it's a serial, and that's part of its appeal to me now. Part of its charm is that you jump in, and it's a serial, basically. It's a serial drama or fantasy. But I just couldn't connect to it as a kid. So then, post re-release, post everything, I was at Kings Island with like a group or something. I don't know if I was with one of my friends, Steven. He was like my BFF when I was in elementary school. We lost touch after elementary school though, but he basically told me, so then this would have been right before junior high, actually. This is like right at the dissolution of our friendship. So he basically told me while we were at Kings Island, he basically told me from beginning to end The Phantom Menace, because he was very excited about it. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, this sounds amazing. Because he told me about how the apprentice and his master were battling one guy, and it was this big epic sword fight, and then spoiler. By the way, we're going to be spoiling all of Star Wars in these episodes, so fair warning. And then he told me that like Qui-Gon dies, and then it's up to Obi-Wan to take down Darth Maul, and I was like, this sounds just absolutely incredible.
No wonder you're not friends with them anymore.
Yeah. So anyway, I eventually watched that. I was just okay with it. I think I was really attached to the Duel of the Fates, the final lightsaber battle.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I actually read some, like, in my boredom as a kid in like junior high, I read like a little bit of fan fiction. Like, there was one that stuck out to me that was from Obi-Wan's perspective during that battle, and him being haunted like immediately after Qui-Gon dies, like saying like I didn't try my best, I should have moved. And I was like, that's so cool. Like, I didn't get that from the movie, and that's part of going to be my rant later on. But so anyway, so then eventually I bought the DVDs because I was cultivating a huge DVD collection. Watched them, and just, I don't know, I just never got into it. And I saw Revenge of the Sith in the theater, and I liked that, but I also felt like it was more me wanting to like it than anything else. And then I bought the Blu-rays with the express purpose of reviewing them and watching every special feature throughout the course of the year, but I never got around to doing that. But I have watched them several times over the course of the year, and I think that they're enjoyable movies, but and I can get into my thesis about it before we get into the actual discussion. And this is going to sound harsh because, I have notes. So then that's my history with Star Wars, and then here's my thesis statement for my position on Star Wars as a franchise. And so basically throughout, I've struggled what seems like my entire life so far trying to understand what it is about Star Wars that makes it one of the most celebrated, if not most celebrated, film franchises of all time.
No, you're struggling your whole life with trying to figure out why you don't like it.
Well,
because everyone else does.
And I'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
And as much as I would love to be swept up in the fervor of Star Wars fandom, and as much as I would love, I would love to have as much passion for this or really any franchise, I just can't do it. Maybe it's not for me, but I've really tried to get into it over the years, and and I don't know how honest I am with this, or I don't know how much of this is me just trying to troll you guys, and I don't know how much of this is just honest opinion. But to borrow something that Mike said about 2001: A Space Odyssey and in OV144, our Gap Movies Part 2 episode, Star Wars is a bad franchise, and you guys are wrong for liking it.
Oh my God.
And so, okay, and yeah, that's harsh, and I mean, I don't know, and maybe it's not my full opinion of it, but it's like, I struggled with going through and trying to figure out why I couldn't connect to this franchise the way that everyone else can, and why I can't really reconcile the bad parts of it with the great parts of it. I fully admit, I fully appreciate that the first Star Wars movie from 1977 is one of the most tightly written scripts and most tightly paced movies I've ever seen in my entire life. I will stand by that for the rest of my life. Like, rewatching it, that's one I watched recently. I just noticed that it's just so spectacular, the way that the group that is the core of this original trilogy, they come together and they each get their own moments and their own, like, it's not like they just don't stumble across each other and then that's the band is together and then they're off fighting the Empire. It's a gradual progression, and it makes it so that the time just flies by, and it's spectacular. It's absolutely spectacular. But if you look at Star Wars as a franchise, if you look at it with an objective viewpoint of it, they're just like the acting and the dialogue and those types of things aren't that up to snuff, and that part of that is because George Lucas is not an actor's director. He doesn't get performances out of his performers, and that is to the detriment of the 4 movies that he directed of this franchise. And I mean, okay, so
but one of which is one you just praised.
Exactly, and I'm not praising it because I didn't believe that Luke was wanting to go to what is the line? Tashi Station to get power converters.
Yeah.
He's a whiny kid in the movie, and it's I don't know, yeah. And I praise that movie for the pacing and for the storytelling, really. And I don't know, and like the visual effects are amazing. The models that they used are spectacular, and they hold up very well. But I just feel like there was so much of that first movie is not necessarily borrowed, but it's like I said, it's a serial, so it's based on like it's based on other things. I'm all over the place, but I'm getting just, I don't know. I feel like the franchise as a whole, hang on.
Well, the deck is stacked against you, so it is. It's understandable that you're kind of struggling to put it together.
It is, and I didn't write my notes as clearly as I should have. But okay, let me think of where. So the original trilogy establishes a deep mythology, and it's like a strong and grimy universe and everything. But I feel like there isn't much of exploration of it in the movies themselves. It's more. Like the original trilogy takes place during a civil war, and the original movie, the first movie, is focused on the rebellion. But I feel like in the other movies, that's not. It's not that it's not a focal point, but it's the relationship between Luke and Vader is what kind of just takes over from there. And I wanted to see more of the rebellion, and there is I don't know. I just feel like the I'm stumbling all over here. I'm so sorry, guys.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm getting nervous because I'm anyway.
Are you seeing the holes in your argument?
No. I'm not seeing the holes in my argument. I'm trying to make sure that I express my viewpoint as clearly as I can, because I know you guys are just gonna just demolish it. But okay, so if you look at the Star Wars franchise, the Star Wars universe itself, everything that's like canon now, there's 6 movies. Let's just look at the 6 movies. Mm-hmm. And the original Star Wars is immaculate, is amazing. The Empire I like, and I it's not that it's not amazing to me. It's really, really, really good, but I feel like it doesn't have that pace that Star Wars had, and it's not like some of the stuff kind of drags a little bit. And then Return of the Jedi I can kind of take or leave, and then from there the prequel trilogy is just a complete mess, and we'll talk about those in a while. But it just feels like you have a franchise that, like, if you ask any Star Wars fan, what is your guys' favorite Star Wars movie out of all 6?
For me, it changes all the time. Right now, it's Empire.
It's Empire. I mean, that's mine too.
Okay, 9 out of 10 people will say Empire or A New Hope. They won't say Return of the Jedi, except for Tyler from our friends at the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, actually. So I listened to that today, and I was like, that just kind of destroys my argument. But
well, I used to say for a long time that mine was Jedi, and Fred Icorst, that friend of mine, the one we used to watch most often was Jedi because it was his favorite.
Okay, well, maybe I'm an a-hole, but it just seems like there's 6 movies in this franchise that is revered by everyone, yet there's, for the vast majority of those fans, 2 of them are the standouts. And then you have a kind of sloppy third one. Not necessarily sloppy, but kind of, there are issues with the third one that you can't really avoid.
Yeah.
And then you have 3 prequels that are almost universally reviled, that were the product of the man who created the franchise and the universe himself. And it just makes me question, like, why is this, other than capturing the imaginations of people at a young age, why is this franchise so revered and not viewed as objectively as I'm making a point to view it? In the analogy that I had, and you guys are going to hate me for this, but I feel like my viewpoint of it is, it's like saying that Breaking Bad is the greatest show of all time if Breaking Bad only had seasons 3 and 4 and was the rest of the series was Twilight and Teletubbies.
Wow.
Well, yeah, that's pretty unnecessarily harsh. I wouldn't say any of the prequel movies are Teletubbies or Twilight.
Okay, we will get into a discussion about that, because I will say,
I'll say to your major point is, why is it such a revered franchise? That's kind of your major thesis.
Yeah.
You're thinking of it as a 6-movie franchise so far, whereas 90% of the reverence that you mentioned that people have for it was based on the first 3 movies.
Right. Sure.
Because, that's how most people came to it for a long time. That's all anyone had, with the exception of some extent, expanded universe stuff. But, until the prequels came out, so many people loved Star Wars based on the first 3 movies. So out of 6, 4 of them are kind of, if not just suck, and there's 2 of them that are good, really good. So out of 6. But if you look at it from the original trilogy, where, like I said, most of the enthusiasm was built, 2 out of them are out of the 3 are really good, and the third one's just kind of, you can kind of forgive the third one a little bit.
And I can totally. So. Okay, I'm a fan of the Alien franchise, and Alien and Aliens are like the only 2 really good ones of that franchise.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Mike, what do you think?
I think Tiny said it well, but I think even more than that, is you, I think because you kind of came in late to it, for you it kind of all happened quickly, right? And for Tiny and me and a lot of us, especially those of us who were old enough to see the movies in 77 and 80 and 83, they lived a long time with these just 3 movies, and they were able to build up around that. My first action figure was not a Jar Jar action figure. It was a Han Solo. And then I had a Luke. And so the prequel trilogies, while I agree, I think we're all going to trash them quite a bit. I think there are things to like. I don't think they're as bad as Twilight by a long shot.
I read fan fiction about the lightsaber duel in The Phantom Menace, so I'm not going to completely trash on it. But
yeah. But I think somewhere along the line, to make your point about how you don't understand why, you kind of let the prequel trilogy color how you feel about not just the thing as a whole, which I think it is kind of warranted, but you also let it color the original trilogy, which I think is unfair to the original trilogy, because like Tiny said, most of us care mostly about those.
But that, okay, I understand that, and I totally, I respect your guys' opinion. I'm not trashing your guys' opinion. This is my personal viewpoint about Star Wars, and I would, like I said, I would freaking love to be a huge fan of this franchise, but it seems like a selective, kind of a selective fandom. Like, okay, yes, these first two movies are just they've changed my life. And then he went and just destroyed them, and he continued to destroy them with the special editions and the alterations that he made to it. Like, you can't get, like, there's no way that a fan can get that original theatrical release of Star Wars from 1977 in an era where we have Blu-ray and we have high definition. Like, that doesn't exist, because George Lucas is, frankly, an insane person who I can't understand how fans can reconcile that with that. And
right, but don't you love and watch Halloween every year, even though Rob Zombie?
Yeah, and plus, to your point, people kind of hate George Lucas now.
They do. There's a movie based on it.
I would hope so, because
they hate the man and not his art.
Sure,
that's kind of the way.
Sure,
so that's where all the angst and the anger was. It was all forced onto George Lucas as opposed to the magic of Star Wars.
Sure, but and this is a lesser example, and this is maybe a cheap shot. But first of all, Halloween. Yes, I love the first Halloween. The franchise as a whole is just, hit and miss, with much more misses than hits.
Yeah.
But it's not there's not a central figure except for Mustafa Akkad, who was a producer on it. Like John Carpenter didn't
I get what you're saying.
He's
John Carpenter is not George Lucas.
Yeah, and like what I don't this comparison isn't going to be fair, but Mike, I remember when we talked about, and I love you to death, but I remember when we talked about the How I Met Your Mother series finale. When you were so opposed to that finale, you said that it would ruin your enjoyment of the series upon rewatching it. I remember you saying that you probably won't be able to rewatch it because the finale was so bad. So what's the difference with George Lucas going and literally retconning things and throwing in offensive stereotypes and just doing absolutely horrid things to the mythology in these prequel movies? Like, how can you reconcile your fandom of the original trilogy with what I can only assume is George Lucas's vendetta against the fans?
I think that's a good question. But I would clarify that I don't think anything in the prequel trilogy, aside from the quality of it, does anything to ruin the story of the first three. I mean, I know people shout out midichlorians and all that, but and I think they are kind of silly, and I think it takes away a little bit from it. But I also think I'm also a man of science who kind of appreciates that, and I also think it's just a word they use to describe something that everybody can kind of have. I don't mean to defend midichlorians, but I don't think that the prequel trilogy is as retconning as I think people think it is. So I'll give you another example. Mm-hmm. I hate How I Met Your Mother, and I still stand by that because I hate how the finale said it didn't just go back and change what we saw. It said what we saw was, which we thought was one thing, was not. Mm-hmm. So a better example of a finale that was bad, that doesn't change my opinion or anything of the show, is Seinfeld. Like, nobody likes the finale of Seinfeld, but it doesn't ruin the show. Right. And so, like I said, I would argue that the quality of the prequels clearly dips, but I don't know that the fact that certain things aren't there affect my watching of the original trilogy.
Plus, just to throw this out there, meeting the mother was the focal point of the entire series. So it's like that's what every single thing was leading up to.
The prequels were the story of Anakin, though.
But there was no single one focal point that the entire franchise was building to in Star Wars.
Right.
Sure.
Whereas, yeah.
Sure, yeah, and
you can effectively throw out the prequels and just watch the original. If you want to know the entire story of Ted, you got to watch the whole show, including the bogus finale.
Sure, yeah. And Mike, your point about Seinfeld just hit me in the right spot, because I watched the finale like a month ago, and yeah, I still rewatched the series. Episode by episode, but it didn't affect my feelings on the series as a whole. So yeah, but I see your point there. What else? I'm just trying to let you guys know. And by the way, all hate mail can be directed at matt@obsessiveviewer.com, at obsessiveviewer on Twitter. So the original trilogy, I have more notes, and we'll get more into it as we go on, because we'll go movie by movie.
Let's talk about the movies.
Okay, yeah. This is my final thought about in my really haphazard thesis statement on my feelings about the Star Wars as a whole, is that I've mentioned here, and I haven't seen Star Trek, and Star Trek and Star Wars are not comparable at all.
No.
But Star Trek for me is a better space franchise than Star Wars was, and I felt like that getting into Star Trek, the original series.
I mean, you just did exactly what you said.
No.
You told people not to do.
No. I'm just saying in terms of classic space movies and space. I'm trying to say that it's not that Star Wars isn't. I don't know.
But you're comparing them. I mean, we'll say say that, but then Star Wars is a better movie franchise, or Star Wars blasters are better, which is just comparing them. You're just comparing them. What does Star Trek have to do with it?
Okay. Then I'll retract that, but I'll say that the overarching theme, and you guys can totally tell me if I'm right about this, but the overarching theme of the original trilogy is just this dichotomy between good and evil. It's a classic story, the hero's journey, and it's a story about good and evil, and good triumphing over evil, and the bond between this ragtag group of rebels, which is one of the things that draws me into it and gets me close to actually enjoying it. But I feel like that's it for me. I kind of wish that there was something a little deeper than that, and maybe a little more philosophical, and there's a spiritual angle to it, but it's something that just has never really spoke to me as a viewer of it, and maybe that's my disconnect with it, and we can talk more at length about this angle of it as we go into our discussion of the movies. But I just want to let you guys know from a personal perspective, I get the point, but it's not like I'm just like, oh, hey, yeah, cool, lightsabers are cool. I'm trying to get a grasp on it, but it's just not sticking to me.
But lightsabers.
I would say, I mean, Mike was joking, but I would say, but the Force. I think that's where a lot of the depth comes from, is it's this intangible force that like literally runs everything, and it's, people have connections to each other that they can't even explain because of the Force, and it just touches all living things, and it permeates any kind of prejudice or wrongdoing or any kind of intentions. It's just this thing that's there, and it's clear cut, and there's right and there's wrong. There's the light and the dark side of the Force, and it's just, I think so much depth comes from that. There are some moments throughout the franchise where I think it demonstrates how powerful that is, and it's interesting to think about that and how you would be affected by it. I think that's where a lot of the depth comes from, and the deep connection that people have to Star Wars. That's what I would say in response to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mike,
part of it.
How about you?
Oh,
are we still friends?
Oh, yeah, of course we are. Of course we are.
I'm not sure. I'll answer later.
Because I have more notes here.
I would just say, like I joked, lightsabers and the Force and all that stuff is really cool, but also it is the expanded universe, and I know that stuff doesn't count. Are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Okay, it got really quiet. Anyway,
Okay.
and I know if we're talking about the movies, that stuff doesn't count, and I know the prequel trilogy is bad, but man, the toys are so rad, and the books are so good, and the video games are so great, and they're, I mean, if it's this merchandise machine, I'm in. It got me.
Yeah.
And so that's enough for me.
And I wouldn't even
Maybe
say
it is. Maybe I'll admit my love for Star Wars was found in the merchandise machine.
And I wouldn't even say that. Like I won't even meet you there, because I'm not. That sounds harsh. I mean, I wouldn't even say that, because that sounds very dismissive of your fandom and everything. Because I fully believe that the reason why Star Wars is such a huge thing, part of the reason why is that, and it's one of the reasons why it inspired an entire generation of filmmakers. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited for The Force Awakens is that J.J. Abrams is one of you guys. He's grown up with Star Wars. It's influenced his entire career. But what I feel like is that George Lucas, in terms of like when you think about the expanded universe and all the video games and all this other content that's separate from the movies, it feels like George Lucas just created a universe, created a lore, created mythology, created everything for everyone else to kind of fill in. And that sounds, I don't know if that sounds harsh. I don't know if that sounds dismissive of it or disingenuous. I don't know, but it just seems like there's enough in the original trilogy, but then when you think about the expanded universe, it feels like it's more people filling things in, and it's more in the conversation of what's the conversations about Star Wars aren't necessarily from my perspective. They aren't about the deeper meanings of things going on in the movies. It's about what's going on in the universe that we don't see, and that's something that I can't really reconcile as a fan of movies. Basically, does that make sense, or am I coming across as an ass?
No, I think it totally makes sense, and I think it completely clarifies what's going on here, and I think that if of course we're going to talk about these movies, and when we continue to talk about these movies, I think Tiny and I are subjective enough or objective enough, excuse me, right. And smart enough to critique the parts of the movies that we don't like. But I guess one of the drawbacks or one of the shortcomings of talking about this on a podcast is, for me, it is more than the movies, and that's the difference between the two of us. Is you want to come on here and talk about the movies, and obviously that's why I'm here. Obviously we're talking about the movies, and I can talk about the movies all day, but the reason you can't get in is because the movies should be enough for you. And in almost every other case, the movie is enough for me, but Star Wars, my love for Star Wars is something else. Does that make sense? Because I feel like we kind of have figured this out.
I think that we've reached a level where you guys probably aren't going to kill me. So,
well, yeah, of course not.
Tiny, what do you think about all this?
I can understand what you're saying as far as the incompleteness of it. I think one thing that makes the original Star Wars, A New Hope, what makes it so I think what people attach to it so much is there was so much potential there for all this stuff, but it has this pretty basic story where basically this kid from this planet that's like the Wild West hooks up with a smuggler, and there's this old wise sage, and they accidentally get pulled into the biggest conflict in the universe on this this Death Star, and they hop around this Death Star for a little bit and narrowly escape, and then in the end this kid is just thrust into this huge battle and kind of wins the day. I mean, it's a very simple story, and it's just so you don't explore every facet of the universe and what all is entailed in that, but there's so much potential there, and you know there's going to be more, and so it's like I understand why that first one has that, just all that feeling to it, and then once it is explored in the 2 sequels, you know, I'm speaking in terms of only having the first 3 movies. The 2 sequels, I don't think explore it as fully as we all kind of want it to.
Right.
I can admit those flaws. There's absolutely flaws in the 2 sequels in that respect. So I don't think it's explored as fully as it could be, or as it maybe should have been. So I can understand where you're coming from there, and why that would kind of taint the rest of it for you.
Tiny,
so.
I disagree. I think
really?
you're well, I think you're trying to find Matt's perspective, but I think if you search your feelings, you know it to be true that you love what you get to see. I love the rest of the 2 sequels.
Yeah.
Seeing Bespin is super cool. Knowing that there's guys out there like Lando is super awesome. We get to see Dagobah, which is amazing. We get to see asteroid fields, which is amazing. Hoth is one of the coolest places in movies ever. Not only do we go back to Tatooine, but we see a different part of Tatooine. We see Jabba's palace, and I think we get a lot of expansion in the sequels.
That's okay. One thing that I'm not crazy about with this whole franchise is I don't think the conflict is established very well. And the reason I'll say that is because it's kind of classic in the sense that it takes the approach that there is good and there is evil, and these people are evil and these people are good, but they don't really. I mean, obviously Darth Vader and the Emperor are just awful, you know, but like when we come into this franchise, the conflict's already established. There's already the rebellion and the Empire, but we don't really get to see what Darth Vader did and what the Emperor did, other than
and we never see that, and that's a knock on episode 3.
Other than dismantling democracy, not very handily. Dismantling democracy is the worst thing they did. Now, obviously,
they blew up a planet.
Yes, but that's before the conflict. That's during the conflict. That's part of the war. You know what I mean? So obviously, there's a whole genocide. That's as bad as it gets. But I'm saying that's after we have this whole dichotomy set up, and there could be more establishment of the conflict in this franchise.
That's kind of one of the things that I was thinking about the other day. Was that, I mean, I would love, like, we'll get into the prequels, in a bit, but one thing that I would not mind seeing at all is a Darth Vader, anthology movie from one of the standalone movies that depicts Darth Vader and the Emperor starting the Empire, like, in between episodes 3 and 4. Like, I think that would be, I mean, I think that would do a lot for my perspective of the franchise and everything. But
I mean, I've read those books. I've read those comics. That's additional stuff.
The most recent. Oh yeah, did they have the recent? Are you talking about expanded universe?
I'm talking about old expanded universe.
Okay.
BD before Disney, and also I'm current with the new stuff, and they explore that stuff.
I'll have to check that out because I just want to reinforce. I am really, really excited for The Force Awakens. The reason that I'm excited for it is that I almost called him Jar Jar, is because George Lucas has nothing to do with him. To do with it, and I think that this is a chance for me to get some childlike excitement out of this saga, rather than being the guy who is kind of a douche about it, and that makes so many just hilarious posts and messages to you guys about how excited I am about Sisters coming out, or how I'm excited about the guy who everyone blamed for Lost, ruining Lost, is taking over Star Wars, and it's just, I like making those jokes, but I'm genuinely excited to see what's to come. But we can talk about the movies actually.
Do people blame Abrams for Lost?
Well, it's kind of not. They don't blame him. It's all the fault goes on to Lindelof and Hughes, but I know that there was a lot of like when there was a stigma against J.J. Abrams' name because his name was attached to Lost, and he helped develop the pilot, and it's like he's built his career upon mystery and stuff like that, and it's like and that's another, and that can kind of dovetail into some of the issues I have with the original trilogy, and I won't be harsh about it here, but there's from my perspective, and you guys have more knowledge of George Lucas and of his frame of reference and all that, but it just seems like okay, there's a very great self-contained movie in Star Wars. Then with The Empire Strikes Back, I don't believe that he had planned to have Vader be Luke's father. People talk about how Vader is, I think, Dutch for father, and I think that that's giving George Lucas way too much credit because I don't think he is that subtle. And then in the third movie, it's revealed that Luke and Leia are brother and sister, and that kind of seems also like that seems a little. It seems like each sequel retcons something big for sake of developing story and characterization and relationships and stuff, and it just seems like it doesn't fit together that well. Like there's one scene.
Well, just to state my case, if I could. Really quick,
go right ahead.
I'm with you on the Leia thing. I think that's pretty clear, and it's also, I think it's pretty universally agreed that whatever he tells us about them being brother and sister and that he knew is not true. That's totally added on.
Right.
But the fact that Vader is Luke's father, I do believe that was planned. And you say he's not that subtle. Vader being Luke's father is not subtle.
No.
Right? So it's a very Lucasian thing to do.
Yeah. And I'm just saying strictly from the argument that Vader means father in another language. Like I don't think that he thought that when he was writing Star Wars. And I mean it's perfectly reasonable to think that he has it all mapped out and everything like that, but I just feel like there's one line in the entirety of the first movie where Beru is talking to Owen, and Beru says that I think that he's what is it? He's going to be like his father or something like that.
He has too much of his father in him.
He's too much of his father in him, and then Owen's like, "That's what I'm afraid of." And like, you can easily say like, "Oh, that's he knows." Like that's a clear thing. But in my head, it's like that's not the case because the only context for what his father was that he was an ace pilot who followed Obi-Wan onto some crazy adventure and ended up getting killed by Vader. Like that's the only context we have for it. And in that line of dialogue fits very well with that what was established in that movie. And I just don't feel like there's anything that would lead. Like one of the reasons why I feel like one of the reasons I assume that it is the biggest twist ending in movie history is because there was no real pretense for it.
I don't know about that.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think I'm not. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but I think that the line between Beru and
Owen,
Uncle Owen, thank you, is I think it's warranted because in the context of the full franchise, we know that they met. Owen and Anakin met when Anakin was searching for his mother when he came back to Tatooine in the second movie, in Attack of the Clones. It's kind of hard to keep all this straight with the vernacular, but we know that they met. We know that Owen knows he went and just slaughtered a bunch of Tusken Raiders to get his mother back and stuff like that. And also, we know that Obi-Wan lived on Tatooine after Luke and Leia were born to help watch over Luke. And so I think it's fair to assume there was some contact between Owen and Obi-Wan throughout Luke's life before he knew who he was and that his father was Vader. I think they stayed in contact to a certain extent. So I don't think that was necessarily an unwarranted line, and I think it kind of fits. I don't know.
I would say it retroactively fits, but Mike, what do you think?
Oh, I think this is a little too speculative.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, there's no way to know if he really intended Luke to be father, or I don't know. And the line doesn't bother me.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't bother me either. It's just I'm saying that in expectation of people saying that, oh well, he knew that Vader was going to be Luke's father because he put that line in the movie, and I don't buy that, because in the context of the movie it still fits. In the context of the story of Luke's father in the first Star Wars, that line fits because.
Oh sure, but that's also not Lucas's reasoning. Like, that's not his explanation. He doesn't say, well, what about that conversation with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru? I think that's just fan speculation.
Sure, yeah, and yeah, this is all speculative, and we're probably losing listeners at the second. But yeah, so anyway, so let's talk about the movies, because I've alienated enough people on this episode. So yeah, why don't we? Yeah,
well, I'm not sure where we want to go from here.
I don't know. Star Wars, 1977. It was released in 1977. What do you guys think of it? I've talked about it in my rants that it is probably my favorite of the franchise, and I would hope that The Force Awakens may shake it, or a future Disney movie might make me more.
That's an interesting perspective, or an interesting question to ask. Do we hope Force Awakens is better than Star Wars? Ugh.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what I want. That's a good question.
Yeah, and I mean, I wouldn't say that I hope that it's better, but I hope that it awakens more enjoyment out of, like, I don't want to be a stick in the mud because Kylo Ren said a line of dialogue. Oh, I'm sure that I'm going to love it. I honestly believe I'm going to love it, and that's one of my underlying things that I was going to say for later in the discussion. But one of the reasons why I'm being so I don't know what word. I'm afraid of what word you guys would use to describe my discussion of Star Wars in this episode. But the reason why is that I have a serious fear that if The Force Awakens isn't good, or isn't that great, I feel like there's going to be this cloud over it or this perspective on it from the diehard fans. Not saying you guys, but just saying that with the internet and everything, like, if it's not that great, I feel like people aren't going to be able to separate their fandom from their objectivity of it.
True.
And I feel like it's going to be.
But didn't they? I mean, didn't we do that with the prequels? Like, how?
Well,
what do you mean? I think they have.
I have stats here, but I mean, it's.
What about how much money the movies make?
Well, yeah. That, I mean,
Iron Man 3 was the biggest movie. Jurassic Park is the third biggest movie of all time. Like, people go see bad movies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Yeah, Avatar as well.
Right.
Obviously, but I don't know. I just. And there was a bunch of kind of a diminishing gross, box office gross for the prequels, but I just feel like there's going to be so much excitement. Oh, and maybe this is an completely unfounded fear on my end, but I feel like there's going to be so much excitement and fervor over the fact that it's a new Star Wars movie, and it looks like it's going to be a freaking amazing Star Wars movie, that if there's any, I don't know. I feel like there's going to be.
I think you're trying to say that people are going to push away their doubt. It's the fact. Yeah. I think you're saying that, we were burned by the prequels, and so now that there's something coming out and it has everything working in its favor, everyone wants to love it so much that even if they don't, they're going to anyways, because they kind of have to as diehard fans.
Yeah.
Because that would just, if they actually admitted how much they didn't like it, if they do. This is just so speculative. It's kind of hard to.
It is.
Say, but
yeah, I think this is pretty off base.
I know what you're saying, but I just.
There are better ways to say it, but I don't know. That's just one of my fears, is that any type of objectivity applied to, or any type of criticism levied against a movie that people are revering so much is going to be met with an adversarial tone or something like that. Like it's going to be dismissed as like, well, he's just not a Star Wars fan. Or something like that. Does that? I'm basically building.
It makes 100% sense. I just don't agree with you.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, let's talk about the damn movies.
Yeah, of course.
God's sake. Okay, so Star Wars made domestic lifetime gross $460 million.
A bajillion.
A bajillion. That's a worldwide gross. That's the domestic lifetime gross. Worldwide gross of $775 million. I think adjusted for inflation, I think that's over $1 billion.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and in its original run, it made $307 million, and then there was a reissue in 1982. Mike, do you know anything about this? Is it just a?
Yeah, it's just the same movie. That's when they added the episode 4 to it. Well, no, they added the episode 4 shortly after. They added A New Hope in the 82 re-release.
Oh, okay. So is it just like a re-release, like it's coming back to theaters kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Picked up another $15 million there. Then in the special edition in 1997, it made $138 million. Holy crap.
That's a lot for 1997.
Yeah. So
Big deal.
yeah. So what do you guys think? I've talked about it. A perfectly paced movie. Blah blah blah. How do you guys feel about Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope?
Oh man, I feel like I've already done this. It's just great. I mean, it's so good. It's the one thing I haven't said in this podcast, which I feel like we should say is it changed movies. I mean, George Lucas invented things to use to film this movie that he then sold for additional bajillions of dollars that other films just had to use forever. I mean, nobody had ever seen a movie like Star Wars when Star Wars came out.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say I think I said earlier, I think the simplicity of it really works in its strengths. There's kind of just this ragtag group of people who stumble into the biggest conflict in the universe, and it goes from there. And this random kid it's like pulling some kid out of Tucson, Arizona, and he assassinates Hitler and destroys, I mean, it's like, that's what it is. It's just a really cool, impressive story that starts with such a simple premise and it takes off, and I think that's what I love about it. But just, I think it's fun to look back on this first movie, knowing the entire genesis of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Just because I think it's interesting to see what he does in this movie, because I don't know if I would go so far as to say that he's kind of a shell of his former self, but I kind of feel like his job, he feels like his job is done. And I think that, I mean, he kind of just gives up in the battle with Vader and just basically passes on into the next realm or whatever. I think he's kind of felt like he's passed the torch, and that's all speculation on my part, but just, I watched all 6 movies in the past month or so. And that's kind of that's something new sort of that I kind of picked up on watching Star Wars: A New Hope, for the 58th millionth time when I watched it this year as a 28-year-old man. That's kind of what I focused on, and I kind of enjoyed that new perspective that I brought to it. Because also I watched it. My girlfriend had never seen any of them, so I was like, I'll let you decide how we watch it. Mm-hmm. She wanted to watch it in chronological order of the story, so we started with episode 1, and so I got to see all that before coming to episode 4. And so that's just the perspective that I kind of brought to watching A New Hope this time. And
how was that on you watching Star Wars? Like, how did the prequels color your enjoyment of Star Wars? I mean, I know that's a loaded question, because you know the original trilogy so well, but did you experience anything different while watching it?
Not really, because I mean, with the prequels, what I enjoy about the prequels is the relationship of Obi-Wan and Anakin. Just, I mean, it's pretty questionable dialogue throughout it and questionable acting during that relationship. But I think the essence is there, and I tear up like a bitch every time in the final scenes of episode 3 when he just cuts Anakin down. It just gets me every time, and I don't know. That's kind of how that's just what I focus on with the prequels, and just kind of just laugh at the stupid crap that's in there, and just try to have as much fun with them as I can, because they are pretty bad. So it didn't. As long as I just focus on that stuff, because it carries so well into the original trilogy, it doesn't really negatively affect how I feel about the original trilogy. The prequels didn't taint it that much for me.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Where were we at in that conversation? Mike, did you have anything to say about that?
Well, I can't come from the same perspective he came from, because I haven't watched them probably since Star Wars Day back in May, to be honest.
Okay.
That's not to say, I know that sounds like a cop out. Oh, I haven't watched the movie, but if we're talking about how do the prequels color I think the obvious thing is that the reveal that Luke is Vader's son is kind of the big one that's spoiled. But also for me, even the first time I saw it, I knew that was the case.
Right.
So I have no idea what that surprise is like.
Right. And
true.
And to Tiny's point about Luke being the, kind of everyman kid kind of character, like that I believe is the appeal of the franchise itself, is that like people who saw this movie as kids, like they saw themselves in Luke, and like, oh, Luke is just this, this poor little farmer kid who wants more out of his life, and he just happens to get more out of his life. Sucks to be his aunt and uncle, but he gets to go on adventures. He gets to kiss a cute girl who, just judging from that movie alone, and he gets to be the hero, and that's amazing, and that's so thrilling, and that's why he gets a cool lightsaber, and I get that and everything. It's just, I wish I could have seen it at a younger age. Yeah.
Of course, we find out later that
you didn't want to be Han Solo.
Sure, I mean he's cool. Kind of. I was gonna make a joke, but I feel like I'm not in the right. I'm not in the right.
You don't have the audience for it.
I don't. But I was gonna say, like, it would be a lot. I would want to be him if he would have shot first, but that's neither here nor there.
Okay. I think this is our opportunity to talk about the thing we were talking about before the show. Would you like to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Matt and I both have a problem. Well, I'll let you say it, because I think you're even more heated about it. Actually, I think it would be better received if I said it first.
Okay.
Right?
Sure. Go ahead.
So we both have this issue with all this incessant non-news every single hour of the day leading up to the release of Star Wars. Mm-hmm. The reason I'll let Matt give his examples and his qualms, but the reason I bring this up is the Han shot first bullshit. It's bullshit.
Yes,
I hate it. Everything you see is this debate, and you can buy T-shirts that say Han shot first, or I'm okay with Greedo shooting first, and we all know that blah blah blah. Like there's some kind of debate. I don't understand what the debate is. There is no debate.
Yeah.
Back in 1977, Han shot first. Mm-hmm. People liked that. Later on, George Lucas clearly changed it. People didn't like it. You either like it or you don't, that there's a change. There's no debate whether or not it changed. I don't understand the debate that people have about this Han shot first bullshit. And it's like once a week I'll see somebody make a more evidence that Han did actually shoot first. And I'm like, who the f*** are you talking to? I remember I had students who knew that I liked Star Wars, and we would talk about Star Wars a little bit, and sometimes at the end of the day when we have a discussion, he'd go, but the only thing that matters is Han shot first. And I'd be like, yep, that's true. Of course he shot first, except for later when Greedo shot first. And that's stupid, but who the f*** cares?
I'm with you.
I love that so much, but I feel like part of the, at least there, I agree. There's absolutely no debate. It's not something to be debated. It's not something to be taking sides on Team Greedo's Team Han, anything like that.
Right.
To make another Twilight reference, but I think the underlying issue is that maybe the outcry over Han shooting first is the outcry at George Lucas for tampering with everyone's childhoods in the way that he did. And I totally get why people are pissed that Greedo shot at him before he killed Greedo, because it changes just ever so slightly the character of Han Solo that was established in the original format, where he just shot indiscriminately. He knew that he was cornered and all that stuff, but he killed him without hesitation or anything like that. And to have him shoot at him first is just to kind of soften him just a little bit. And I mean, it's in the grand scheme of things, we still get Han Solo, we still get the Han Solo that we know and love. But it's such an indicator of how out of touch George Lucas is with his own creation, that he can find ways to justify changing something so fundamental about a character that he created, that for something that he oversaw, one of the most celebrated characters in all of cinema. And he just doesn't, like, he still stands by it, I guess. I think that it's more a reconciliation of George Lucas being insane than any actual debate over whether or not he did or didn't shoot first or anything like that.
Right.
I think it's a way to
agree fully on that.
Yeah. And yeah,
But
go ahead.
To our point, the problem is this news.
Yes, God.
So talk about the news that you hate so much.
That goes back to my fear over how the Force Awakens is going to be received, because us here on the podcast as obsessive viewers, the entire idea of the obsessive viewer is that we're giving our thoughts about movies, about TV shows, we're reviewing them, and I like to have good discussions over things that we watch. And my fear is that, and I consume a lot of media. I listen to a lot of different podcasts, a lot of different discussion podcasts about movies and TV, and I just feel like I'm going to be, here in a couple weeks when the episodes start flooding in about the Force Awakens, I just feel like it's just going to be like, oh, okay, well, I loved this when the lightsaber did this, and when Finn did that, and when Kylo Ren said this, and I'm afraid that I'm going to have thoughts about it saying that, okay, well, this doesn't really mesh that well. This didn't really make sense. The storytelling, I have a feeling that if I have criticisms, they're going to just be drowned out in a wave of just love for a movie, and I feel like my voice isn't going to be heard, and I don't know. So anyway, the news.
Well, I feel like I want to speak to that before we go on. You obviously we were all young. I mean, we're all the same age, and so we were young when Episode 1 came out. So too young to really care all that much. And you, because you weren't even in it, didn't notice at all. But the backlash to Episode 1 was immediate.
Yeah.
It was immediate, and they were just as speculative now, maybe even more so than they were back then. It's just that it's everywhere. Before we had, when Phantom Menace came out, we just had to guess. You know what I mean? Like, maybe Qui-Gon is going to be Luke's or Anakin's father, or Jar Jar was going to be some great Sith Lord, or there was all kinds of that stuff beforehand. And pretty immediately, the reputable sources, and by reputable I mean sources like EW, so take that for whatever it means.
Sure.
They were pretty quick to call the movie not good. So that's one thing. The second thing is, even if it's not, I would ask you, and you are under no obligation, but I would ask you to give it a few months.
Oh yeah.
Right? Let it die out. Let it die down. Let people take it in, and the same way. Jurassic Park. I'll use that movie again. The same way now when we talk about Jurassic Park or Jurassic World, we're all like, Yeah, no, it wasn't really that good.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
I
mean,
think you just got to give it a minute. But also I think if it's bad, I think the critics will know.
I hope so. And this is, I mean, and granted, this isn't even good radio, so we can stop. I can stop bringing that aspect of it up. That, like, it's all speculative. It's all. We're gonna know in a week. Either way.
My God, we're gonna know in a week.
We're gonna know in a week. So anyway, to the point about the news though, is that it makes me hate the internet. It honestly makes me hate the internet because there are sites, there's just this onslaught of the Force Awakens news, and it's reached a point where I see things I don't want to see. Like I saw, I won't say what it is because this is a spoiler. It's a spoiler. And this same thing happened with Jurassic World too, is that there are tweets and there are news items and there are announcements that, oh, so-and-so character is going to be in episode 8. It's like, all right, so that's cool. I don't need to worry about this person dying in this movie.
Yeah.
And
totally.
it just pisses me off so much. And then there are just non-news segments about it. There's YouTube videos of all 6.5 minutes of the trailers from The Force Awakens cut in chronological order, despite the fact that no one's seen the movie yet and therefore cannot possibly know what is chronological order. It's all guessing, and it's all speculation, and it's all just really infuriating to me that, and that's what gives me pause about what kind of reaction it's going to have when it's released, because people that I genuinely respect their opinion in podcasts and blogs and reviewers and everything, I feel like they're not going to be able to have an objective eye about this, and it's going to just make for just annoyance on my level, on my part. I mean, like J.J. Abrams was on Jimmy Kimmel a couple weeks ago. I may have even mentioned this on a podcast, or maybe it was in a stinger in one of the episodes, but he was on Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Kimmel, for a comedic bit, was like, hey, what's the first spoken word in The Force Awakens? And then J.J. Abrams, by the way, guys, spoiler alert, J.J. Abrams playfully responded that the first word spoken in The Force Awakens is this. And then they had, like, on the screen, they had, this is the first word. Oh my God, it's amazing. And then the next day, there were reputable news sites that ran it as news. Like I think Deadline.com reported it saying J.J. Abrams reveals what the first spoken word in The Force Awakens is. And I'm like, why? Just,
yeah, that's pretty stupid.
It's beyond stupid. It's so, it makes me less excited for something that I am genuinely very excited for. And it just makes me just so aggravated that it's just commonplace all over the internet, that it's okay for us to be part of this culture that is just completely okay with just with dissecting every little piece of information about something that to J.J. Abrams and to Disney and to Lucasfilms, to their credit, have done an incredible job keeping secret about everything. Like, I don't know what the plot is, judging from the trailers. I know who the main characters are, but I don't know anything about the plot, and I applaud them for that. But I hate seeing people, and it's so far beyond just speculating about it. Like, we can sit here and talk about, oh, BB-8's going to do this, and I hope that Kylo Ren is a good adversary for whoever the main character is going to be. We can say that, but it's to the point where they're just dissecting every little minute thing they can, and I can't imagine this level of. I can't imagine that this level of attention paid to something that is going to be released in a week or a month ago in a month. I can't see that translating to an enjoyable theater experience if you have all of this stuff in your head about what your expectations for this movie is. Yeah.
Well, I'm totally with you guys. I think it's dumb. It's not constructive. I don't think it equates to masturbation at the best. That's the best thing I can say about it. But the thing is, I don't read any of it. I don't expose myself to any of it because I just don't care. Like, I see a dumbass headline like that, like, "Oh, the secret is that we've been seeing Luke Skywalker this whole time. He's behind the mask of Kylo Ren." It's like, I'm just like, I just kind of laugh at it because I just don't get pissed off about it because I just don't expose myself to it and I just don't care. Like, it just doesn't.
Right.
I totally agree with you guys 100%. I just don't. I'm not as upset about it because I don't let it get to me.
For context, for me, I sit at a desk all day doing nothing but loading Twitter, so it's in my face consistently.
I totally agree. Some of it you just can't avoid.
Yeah,
and that's incredibly frustrating. That does piss me off. Yeah. But yeah, like I'm just not quite as upset about it as you guys are. I don't know.
Today I unfollowed the editor of one of my favorite websites and podcasts, specifically because he's there's no, like, he is so obsessed with Star Wars that it's makes it so his Twitter feed is unfollowable to me.
Yeah, that would make me mad. I understand. I completely understand that. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Ugh.
But it's going to be so good, you guys.
I know, it's going to be awesome. I was sitting in my car, though, like 2 days ago or something like that, and I just sat there and I was like, at this point, we thought Phantom Menace was going to be good.
Yeah, we did.
I don't know.
But also, George Lucas was responsible for that. I don't... I mean, we are so all over the place here.
We really are.
How do you guys feel?
Yeah, so much for reviewing the first...
Yeah, but it's fine.
Okay.
What do you guys think of George Lucas, just in general? Like, how do you feel about the man himself?
Every encounter I have ever had, and I've not met him in person, but everything I've ever seen with him makes me like him a little bit less.
Wow.
He just seems frumpy. He just seems angry. I don't know. He seems like an angry person. I don't know. Not interesting to me. Despite everything he has given me, the old version of George Lucas is not interesting to me.
Yeah, and I agree. I think I guess this is speculation, but I think he's a guy who had a really, really knockout home run idea in Star Wars, like just a perfect idea, but his ability to execute that idea is, I mean, it's demonstrably questionable at best. He was not the right man to bring his vision to fruition. I think he's more of a producer behind the scenes kind of guy, and maybe even that's giving him too much credit. But
yeah.
I don't think anyone can clearly say the man is a good director. He's a passable writer. Sometimes, maybe it's just that he doesn't do dialogue well. But he can churn out a story pretty well. We've complimented the tightness of the original trilogy and stuff like that. But I don't think he's just not a hands-on kind of artist, if you will. And I can't really speak to his character as a person, except in the fact that he doesn't really he cares 0% about fan service,
right.
which is just absolutely deplorable, I think.
He seems almost bitter.
Yeah.
And bitter, and as of late, from what the pieces that I've pieced together off the internet, is that he seems just more... I feel like maybe my perspective on him selling the franchise and selling it to Disney was that he just wants to be done with it.
Yeah.
Like, he just doesn't want that...
Sure.
Yeah, he doesn't want that stigma to stick to him anymore. And like I respect that, because something that's so revered should be in the hands of people who care about it. But to your point about the dialogue, I think that when George Lucas, to me, I don't like him. It's core. He's coarse, and when he's in my hands, it's just
he gets everywhere.
He gets everywhere. But
nice.
But no, I don't think. I think that. Okay, we've complimented Star Wars, but also Star Wars in terms of pacing and everything. It is heavily influenced, and Mike, you know more about Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey than I do, but it follows it very closely. And then also, I mean, even pieces of Star Wars are just not banded together, but Star Wars is an amalgamation of so many influences from him. Like there's The Hero's Journey, there's Kurosawa's work, The Hidden Fortress. That's where he got the perspective of the two lowly droid characters. In The Hidden Fortress, if memory serves, it's a story that's from the perspective of people that aren't involved in the actual plot. They're just kind of bystanders, and they're kind of lowly. I think it's one of his movies that takes place in feudal Japan, but they're just kind of like lowly level people who are just witnessing this thing, and that the narrative is told through their perspective. And he borrowed that for Star Wars and appropriated it to service droids. And then and we celebrate the ingenuity of the filmmaking and the shots of space. And one of the podcasts I listen to is Sci-Fi on Screen. I've mentioned them before. He mentions that like the visuals of like the space visuals are clearly influenced by 2001, which is a movie that's more to my sci-fi sensibilities than anything else really. And I kind of feel like that's kind of, if Lucas wasn't, I don't think that Lucas is capable of creating something all on his own, because we get the prequels when he does that. But if he has influences and people that are kind of keeping him in line, I think that he can create something beautiful, like the first two movies of the original trilogy and much of the final movie of the original trilogy. But, and that's kind of where I am with him, is that I think with the prequels, the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast I listen to, it's called the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast. They make the point, they did a best and worst sci-fi directors, and Lucas's name came up, and one of the hosts said that he believes that what happened with the prequels was that Lucas had full control, and no one, he surrounded himself by yes men who were afraid to tell him, like question his judgment and everything. And then that's why the prequels are such a mess. And he's, yeah, so yeah.
I'd agree with that. I mean, I don't think that's only plausible. I think that's probably what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I'd agree. That's probably what happened.
Yeah. And all of this is just preaching to the choir, because I'm sure that no one, I'm glad that no one just reveres. I'm glad that the fandom isn't, well, that's unfair. I'm glad that the fandom isn't like, oh, George Lucas is amazing and everything. I'm glad that there's a turn in it.
Yeah.
Because I don't see how I don't know.
There are probably some defenders out there, but almost everyone has defected and is against George Lucas, and it doesn't give him much credit for the quality of the franchise overall.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons.
Is it possible to just take a quick break to pee? I gotta pee so bad.
Yeah,
actually, me too. So
I'll be here.
Let's just like 2 minutes.
No problem.
Okay.
All right, I'll be right back.
Alrighty. I did not expect this episode to get so derailed.
That's okay. I think it's just something else now, you know? Which I'm kind of okay with. I don't know that we...
Yeah, I mean, going through
I guess if we were going to review, I might have been better off watching another one, because I don't...
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't have review notes. I don't have anything like that.
And that's the thing. I've gotten to the point where I'm super into taking notes while I watch something for the purpose of reviewing. And it's like, when I was watching Star Wars, it was like, I just didn't feel like writing anything down. Like, I mean, I wrote some notes, but it's all like stuff that's, I mean, this whole franchise has just been talked to death. Having said that, this is going to be fun to edit.
Well, yeah, that's true. Thank you for listening to The Obsessive Viewer, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find more of our episodes at ovpodcast.com, and you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast app. The Obsessive Viewer's theme song is An Eclipse of Events and is provided by Loudlike from their EP Mistakes We Must Make. You can find that and more great music from them on iTunes, and like their Facebook page at facebook.com/loudlikemusic. Any and all feedback on the podcast is encouraged. You can email the hosts individually at Matt, Tiny, or Mike at ObsessiveViewer.com, or send an email to the podcast in general at podcast@ObsessiveViewer.com. Check out the Obsessive Viewer blog at ObsessiveViewer.com, where we post movie and TV reviews and the occasional editorial about the business of entertainment. You can also like us on Facebook at facebook.com/theobsessiveviewer and follow us on Twitter at obsessiveviewer, at obsessivetiny, and at IamMikeWhite. If you want more obsessive content in your life, check out our sister site, obsessivebooknerd.com, for book reviews, author spotlights, and a general celebration of reading. Finally, if you're philosophically curious, check out Tiny's side project podcast, The Secular Perspective, which explores the concepts of faith, religion, and existence from the perspective of secular hosts. You can find that at thesecularperspective.com and subscribe to the podcast on the podcatcher of your choice. Again, thank you so much for listening. We love you. Be excellent to each other.
Nothing will stand in our way. I will finish what you started.